There's a cat over here. There's a cat over there. And the wrong one died. And the wrong one died.
Welcome to The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. I'm your host, Mike Abrams, and today we are celebrating Andrew Lloyd Webber. With Phantom of the Opera set to close on Broadway, I'm having a handful of what I'm calling Phantom Cats on the podcast. So today, my guest has been performing in Phantom of the Opera, but before that, he was Buster Jones, Gus, and Growl Tiger on the U.S. National Tour 5. So welcome, Bronson Norris Murphy, and thank you for joining me.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. I'm always excited to have a Gus on the podcast because Gus is the most common non-Grisabella answer. So I'm hoping you're going to be ready to defend your honor here as a Jellicle choice.
Yes, listening to the podcast, I was like, I love how many people want Gus to be the one. That's very touching.
Yeah, Gus is the number one non-Grisabella answer, and pretty close to the same amount. But let's start with your cat's history from the beginning. So I love hearing, when you first were introduced to the musical. Was it a time you saw it on stage? Was it the 1998 movie? Like, when was the first time you got introduced to Cats?
It was definitely the 1998 movie. I owned it on VHS and loved it just because I was a kid who was thirsty for theater. And I grew up in Kentucky, so our main outlet was sort of Nashville and their road shows that would come through the Tennessee Performing Arts Center. But Cats was not one of the ones that I saw. I found the VHS, I'm sure, in some video store, and watched it and loved it because it seemed like it was filmed on stage. And that's the thing I loved watching about movie musicals, the ones that looked like they were filmed on stage, like in a proscenium house. So I loved it. But I would think like of the singers, the non-dancing tracks that you interviewed, I never thought Cats would be a musical for me. Just because I wasn't a dancer and it looked so athletic with Jilly's choreography. And it wasn't until I was old that someone said, I was doing a production of Candide at NYU, and I had seen this movie, obviously, and somebody was like, hey, do you have this high note, thing? And I was like, yeah, that's the same note I'm singing in the show, in Candide. And the choreographer of Candide was about to direct Cats, at the West Virginia Public Theater. And she said, well, I'm really looking for the opera cat. And I said, isn't that the one who has palsy and is all old and stuff? She said, yeah, but you're an actor, So it's like, okay, well, I'll audition for it. And bless her heart, she put me in the show, and I played Gus at the age of 23, and learned all the original. We had 6 days to learn that entire show with a brand new company. From top to tail, and we did it, and it ran for a week or so, and then I went back to a job performing in a theme park, and just after that, in my second year of grad school, I saw the national tour auditions, and at that point it was non-union, and they were kind of accepting any and all ages audition. And I felt like a dancer for the first time in my life because I went into the dance audition having already known the original choreography. So it was sort of already in my body. And so I auditioned for that tour there in my second year of grad school. But yeah, it all started with that beautiful 98 version.
I love hearing you say that because you're completely spot on with everyone I've interviewed. It's the Gus's and the Grisabellas and a couple where you're singers more than dancers. It's like because I think clearly you're all talented enough to do both. But you start with here's more of my forte. Here's what I'm kind of more pursuing and known for. And so the dancers all look at the 1998 movie, and it's like they learned it as a kid growing up. It's choreography that they were taught. It's like their Bible almost. And then singers don't think about it at all, and then all of a sudden realize, wow, I do have a part in this. I could have a part in this. So it's so fascinating to hear you kind of reference that. I am a little blown away that you did it at Gus, again, an older cat at 23, but also that you learned the show in 6 days. So let's start there with when you learn the show in 6 days. How deep do they go into character versus just here's your dance number, here's your staging, here's your singing, like here's how we get through the show so we don't hurt somebody like Cats, versus here's what you need to know to be be Gus for the show, and really and Mustafa and Growl Tiger and all these other characters you play.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot more of the first. It's here are the steps. Let's get the steps down. Let's get our spacing down. Let's be careful with all these lips and these tumbling passes. And then once, hit day 3 or day 4, when you're nearing a designer run, then they start talking about relationships, and some of those nuggets will come up within the rehearsal process. And admittedly, several people that were in the production that I did, the first production I did at that regional theater, had done some version of Cats before. So we had the slight advantage, and we were using all of Jilly's original choreography. So we had some advantage that some of the dancers knew the steps. But it was definitely my first time. The Griddlebone, it was her first time for sure, the person that I dealt with the most. And I believe the Grisabella was a first. So it was sort of like osmosis, like you would watch two cats of a necking or licking thing, like cats do, and and then you'd be like, oh, I should be doing more of that. So you just inhabit that. And I think in the first rehearsal, like the get to know you circle, we started doing some felinity, so we were all pawing each other and stuff. But it's definitely the more down and dirty version as opposed to rehearsing the tour, where we just really dove in and learn the steps first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is like I've talked to a few people who've only done regional productions, and they're on Broadway and have done plenty of other things, and it's like, yeah, just get through it almost. Like here's we don't need to know what Gus's performances were back in his youth. Like we don't need to know what Bustopher Jones when he's not eating, what he's doing, or where Grisabella went when she left, and like all these other nuances that are what make Cats kind of almost super interesting in the fact that there is all these backstories. So it's more of just like, let's get through this. And how long did that production run? Was it, you said you rehearsed for a week, but how long did you go on that regional production?
I think the entirety of the contract was maybe 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. So I think we rehearsed a week and performed a week. And you make an interesting point about all the backstories. I mean, really, I guess it's no one else's business, is it? Like where Grisabella went or what Gus does when he's not haunting, these restaurants. And that's more the actor's homework. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting point, that like you can do that sitting in your hotel room. When you're in the ensemble, it's about supporting your other cast and making sure you know your spacing, your blocking, and your choreography, and you can build your character at home. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think I've been thinking a lot about the regional versus tour versus Broadway versus West End, and all the, like, depending on how long the run is in a show like this, and this is really why this podcast still exists, 100 episodes later, is that there is such ambiguity around the stories and the backstories and really the plot. Even though the plot is overly simple, there is so much to be filled in that you can add. And so when you're, to your point, you're doing a regional production, you're doing 6 days for 14 days, like you're doing the rehearsal to be able to get through the 2.5 hours to almost 3 hours of show safely, because it's a very dangerous dancing show. There's a lot of injuries, but you're probably less thinking about all those backstories. Whereas when you start doing it for years at a time, on tour, months at a time, you have to kind of create a little bit more probably to get through it with that level of detail that you would need. And that is a very different and unique, interesting piece in a show, again, like this, where your interactions with the other cats are half of what makes the show go, because there's so much dancing and other parts that aren't clearly stated as plot, like other shows you see on Broadway.
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there, because as an actor in the show, those interests with your tribe and with your cats that you like and cats that your cat doesn't like, and that's the only thing that keeps you going on a long run, because the grease paint, the unitard, and the steps, or what the audience likes, and your interpersonal relationships on stage are the only thing you can act on to keep the show motivated for you. So that's hugely important in a long run, especially.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're from Kentucky. I'm from Indiana. We don't get all that many shows that run through here. We get a good amount, and we've got some local stuff. When was the first time you actually saw, like, as an audience member, saw it? Was it, you after the regional production? You've obviously been as an audience as part of the cast, but did you ever see it as a general fan?
I never did. The first time I saw a live production of Cats was so I had done the West Virginia and I got the tour, and I was supposed to start the tour in 2010, but in 2009 they were having some difficulties. I think they had lost their Gus to an injury, and the understudy was sick. So they called me and they said, "Hey, I'm not coming until next year, but can you fly in and help us until people get well?" And I was young and naive and had no idea what I was looking at. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I got put on a plane to Canada. I'd never been out of the country. I got put on a plane to Canada, and I was being kind of rushed in to meet the tour that was already in progress. And my first night getting there to start learning the show, I was asked to watch the show. And it was in a huge arena. I mean, the stage looked like a post-it note, in this huge arena. And I was in the back of the house, and I was living. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. But that was the first time I first saw Cats, was when I was, the next day was going to be on stage doing Gus. That first time I did it, because I couldn't learn it fast enough, I only did Bustifer and I only did Gus. They cut the opera for Growl Tiger because I hadn't had time to learn it. Gosh, I'm getting into too many stories. But so to answer your question, the first time I saw it was when I was an employee, but also a fan.
Yeah. So let's get into it. I love hearing a little bit about the transition to the tour, because you had played this track with the same choreography, I think, right? Probably was the same production version. So you had one day, like, how much time, like, what was that introduction into the tour like?
Right. So one story I definitely remember is getting off the plane and getting into a cab, and the cabbie asked me, or credit what I was going to use to pay, and I foolishly had, American dollars with me, and he was talking about loonies and tooties, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I want to go home." But anyway, I paid the cabbie. I got to the hotel. They checked me in. I went to the venue, and you're right, it was the same choreography, but of course the staging was different. Like the placement of all the singers and actors, So it was as if I was learning a brand new show when I happened to know a certain 8 count or 2. I knew all the words, thank goodness, which is why the next night they were able to put me in the Bustifer number, and then just Gus the theater cat. But so yeah, I rehearsed it. I watched the show the next morning. We were in rehearsals with the dance captain, and that night they didn't know what to do because everybody was sick, in that Gus department. And again, young and eager, I was like, "I think I can do it. I think I could do it tonight."
So one day of practice, I guess, and new staging, new everything, and you went on, and
yes.
The audience knows no different.
Well, we hope not. I do remember, Bustifer has to sit on that giant top hat, and I remember doing the rocking back and forth and falling backwards so far that whoever else it was literally had to put me back on the hat. So it was things that I should have worked out in a tech rehearsal or something that I didn't know. But we got through it, and the tour didn't close. So that was good.
That is, it's this happened years ago, but it kind of sounds a little bit more like current, where there's all the illnesses and there's swings and everybody coming on, and to keep it's the true definition of the show must go on, of being able to kind of go in with one day. So I want to go back to when you're getting only one day. You're just doing the dance in the morning with the dance captain. Like, did you go back to your notes from the regional theater or did they tell you anything about what you're supposed to be thinking as Gus and Bustifer, or did that slowly trickle on as you went on more times through that tour?
definitely it trickled on. The first time it was basically like you're going to enter from right
Yeah.
one, you're going to cross in here, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and get off the stage. Like it was very much let's keep the show going here. But then as I continue, I was only with the 2009 tour for 2 weeks because I had to get back to another production I was doing, not of Cats, but another show. So again, I rehearsed, a day for that. And then I think the next day we learned the opera. So eventually I got into the whole track, but I was only with them for 2 weeks. And then I flew back to the States or no, I think we ended in Vegas or I ended in Vegas. So I just flew home.
Wow.
So I was with them for a very short time. So I didn't really get to sink my teeth in until 2010 when I did the role full time on the tour.
Yep. So let's go back to that now. So now this is your third Bus Gus time. How much prep did you get for that? Like, did you go through a little bit more of a normal rehearsal and audition and everything to get through that?
Well, thankfully, I didn't have to audition again because the only reason I went out in 2009 was because I'd already auditioned and been offered the 2010 tour.
Yeah. Okay.
So I didn't have to audition again, but I did get the full experience where it was held over from the 2009 version. We all went into 2010 sort of with a blank slate. So we had a lot of newbies and a lot of old cats. So we all got to, experience Felinity together and we got to form our own tribe. And we talked a lot more about character and relationships because I think we rehearsed that for 2 weeks in a studio, just rehearsals in the studio. What a blessing. 2 weeks. And then we went out to the road and teched it, for another week. And then we had previews and then we ran. So, that was a lot more informed process. And also the first time I felt like I was really doing Cats, like not to take anything away from the first regional production I did, but when you get to marry into something and when you're using the iconic, set, you really feel like you've sort of stepped into the junkyard and are doing the thing that you saw as a kid in that 98 VHS.
Mm-hmm. So I want to dig into a couple of that rehearsal and that process for you because I want to know what you were told as the backstories of the Cats. So what do you remember of here's what I'm supposed to know about Gus and Bustifer? Like here's what the relationships I'm supposed to play. Like what of that do you remember?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know if I remember this from the rehearsals or if I'm just inferring from the poetry, but I remember Bustifer being he's an eater. He likes to eat and likes to be social, and he's very well dressed. So I guess I assume or I know that he's a house cat. I don't think he's a stray because he's eats plenty. That's something I didn't know until the long tour was. The cats who are wearing collars are house cats, and the cats who aren't are wearing strays. And what dynamic does that play? Like what?
Yeah.
So I think Bustifer is hoity-toity, and everybody admires him because he's so different from he doesn't belong to the tribe. He's sort of a visitor that everybody he's like your jolly old uncle that everybody's happy to see once a year. So remember, he was a man of gluttony and decadence, and he liked having things a certain way, and he's very poised, loved his mustache and his monocle. He was an interesting one, and the costume. I mean, the costume of that character was so fun to put on and play. Especially, I'm not a slighter than you might think of a person being, and much younger at the time, for a Gus or a Bustifer. So it was really fun to play outside of my physical self too. You put this garment on with hula hoops and you're 4 times your size. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you get to go back and forth with that too, because you get to go from being this big old jolly cat that's kind of no cares in the world to this kind of frail older former celebrity actor. So you get to kind of do both physical types of that are almost polar opposites of each other.
Well, yeah, and then you throw in the third version, which is Grell Tiger, and he's a muscle man and evil, and he's a pirate, and it was a true like triple whammy there. There's really nothing similar about any of those three cats, and it was a joy to play the things. It was a challenge too, and the costumes obviously helped a lot. But I think of the three, I mean, Gus is so tender and is so full of happy memories and is so kind of willful to do his art again that I definitely would love to play Gus, again in 20 years.
Yeah.
Because I think he's just so sweet, and that song is so beautiful, and it's a true moment of sincerity at the top of Act 2 that the audience, I think, the kids get bored with, and the adults are like, oh, I know you. I'm father. That's my, great uncle. They relate.
I absolutely love it. I want to talk a little bit about Gus's story. So how do you every night, like you're going on to be ideally make your case as like, it's very much that Gus is in the running and a very high potential choice. How much did you think about that in your interactions with Villa and everybody else to kind of make this, basically to act the part of that you're going to be passed over again, or do you even view that you're an option for old dude around me to pick?
When I played Gus, I based him on my lovely grandfather, and I think my grandfather, if he knew it was, selection time, he would have wanted it to be anyone but him. He would have wanted the gift to be given on, right? He wouldn't have been selfish. He wouldn't have asked for it. So I didn't let play into Gus's story. Gus was just there and being reminded of being prompted to tell his story by Jelly Loram. And, he's a little timid at first, but then just like when the juices flow and when the conversation goes and the memories flood back, it gets more and more exuberant. So I don't think in my version of Gus was certainly not that he was auditioning to be the winner, right? But that he was there to be the tribe, and then not chorus, that's a strong word, being asked to remind us all of his days in the spotlight, and then he just gets to have a lot of fun with that. But I don't think I ever cared that I might be chosen. I wanted the right person that Dute wanted to be chosen.
That's so wholesome. It's so very, very thoughtful and I think there's I've enjoyed talking to so many different cast members and who've played different roles, because the show ends definitively the same way every night. And so as much as I jokingly want a different Jellicle choice, and that's what this whole podcast is about, that's not the way it's going to end every night. And so as an actor, you have to almost figure out how to embrace the piece of the story that and kind of bring that in. And so it's cool to hear how you based your Gus to be ready and accepting and okay that it isn't going to be the choice. He's not going to be the choice every night.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to hear, what other theories or relationships do you remember outside of Buster Jones and Gus? What was the thing that you, as you go back from, you saw the 1998 movie, you knew the VHS, you had it, you watched it. As a kid, I'm sure none of those relationships you even thought about. And then you do the production for a couple weeks, you go back on, and then you get the full true rehearsal for the tour with all the new cats and everywhere you're going, and you really kind of dig in. What was the ones that surprised you of I would have never thought about that? This is a relationship I didn't do. And you mentioned one with I didn't know about the Collars either for a while. Those are house cats. But what are the other kind of aha moments as an insider from somebody who was watching it from the outside?
Well, I think watching it from the outside, one of the first things that struck me as, are you kidding me? Is the whole Demeter backstory.
Yeah.
It's who thought of that? And why is that important? And I'm so sorry for her, but that is shocking to me. And I don't think, unless you're a fan or in the show, I don't think anybody's ever explained that to anyone.
That one is that is the most bizarre thing that was, as I've dug into this again, I didn't pick that up when I saw it the first. I've seen it twice on stage. I recognized that as a story arc, and as I've read and learned, I'm like, how is this one of the only true, like, it seems to be one of the only things that is definitively known, that it's consistent across everybody I talk to, is Demeter's backstory. And that is part of why I've always argued I don't think children should see the show, because I'm like, we only know a couple things, and one of them is that Victoria is basically having an orgasm on stage, the orgy's a ball, and Demeter's backstory is super dark.
Yes. Well, and I think that's why it's sort of okay for children to see the show, is because we don't slam that storyline in your face. That, again, that's just for the actor to know and for the tribe to know, and for her to have something to physicalize and know her personal relationships with people. She's scared of most of the men on stage because of that. And yes, you're so right. I had forgotten until you mentioned it, but about Victoria, and she's the white cat, so she's the purest, and she's untouched until the ball. And I love the sisterhood between, either girl would have to tell you something, but Bomb and Demeter, they're sort of like their sisterhood, or Bomb being sort of a sexual troublemaker and always, leading with her hips, and Tugger just wanting to be with every cat on stage, no matter who you are, and I also love the relationship between Jelly Loram and Gus, because, the backstory of Jelly Loram is that she's sort of Gus's caretaker. And in the original version that we toured with, it would make sense that in his memory, he would replace his soprano opera star with the person he knows or loves best, which would be Jelly Loram. So the actors playing Jelly and Gus become Growl Tiger and Grittlebone. So, I mean, it's just chock full of relationships that the audience may never know, but they are constantly aware of because of the behavior of the actors on stage.
I've been joking that that's my goal, is to document as much of it as I can. And that's what this podcast has turned into, is getting all of this in every production, in every country, in every, over the years. The most recent choreography kind of almost doesn't change by any means, like relationships, but loosely could change some, because now people are staged differently, and the actors are dancing slightly different. So now there's a different interpretation, because Lift's Victoria has changed in the choreography over the years and stuff like that. And so now you start debating, what does that mean? And that's become a unique piece to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because all we have is, in my opinion, a sensational score by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and some great poetry by T.S. Eliot, and the original direction by Trevor Nunn and Gilly. And we have framework, right? And if you saw it, when you see this thing on paper, you're like, this will never work.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the 80s they were like, how much of what do we have to smoke to make this work?
Completely.
And they did it. Like, they did it. And we are still talking about this show, and it is still running, and it's a masterwork because of this synthesis of score and design and direction and choreography. And I think when you stray away from that, when people direct and design their own versions of it, they realize how hard it is to make sense of this.
Completely. I mean, there is the fan Wikipedia page, which is where I kind of dug deep when I started this podcast, has over 5,000 pages of subpages.
I don't doubt it.
Of like every production, every person, every character, every potential headcanon. Like, there's just theory after theory after theory. And I could expand the Wikipedia page if I had more time. I've answered a handful of them, of these questions and theories by talking to the cast members that were involved. But I mean, it's grown since when I started. I remember when I have it documented, because in one of my first episodes, I kind of commented on how many pages there were, and there are more now, like significantly more. So it is a show that's been running for so long and in so many different countries and on tour in the U.S. currently. And I think it's in Vienna currently, and it's on Royal Caribbean Cruise currently, and it's still a lot of places, and doesn't seem like it's going to lose steam anytime soon.
Right. It's unlike anything else you can offer an audience. So when people have the chance to produce it, I think there's an Asian tour of it right in rehearsal right now.
Yes.
I think people are like, well, if we can get the rights and we can produce it, let's do it because audiences flock to it. And while you're mentioning them, a huge shout out to the fans of Cats because they are the center of why the show still exists. I had never experienced what having fans would be like until I joined the tour, and not necessarily fans of me, but fans of the show. And it was unbelievable the amount of love and appreciation and insight and joy that we would meet at the stage door of each city and things. So huge shout out if you're listening to the fans of Cats because they are what keeps the show going, really.
Yeah, it's definitely a show that's touched a lot of people in many different ways throughout years of history. So it's cool to see, and there's still the Junkyard is a great group of people that are huge fans. There was some Tumblr pages and a lot of fun. There's a great cosplay group. There's people that put on really amazing Cats cosplay, and so it's a very powerful fan base and super fun, and also a very welcoming fan base of people.
I love to hear that. I really do.
We'll be back after this short break.
So, speaking of long running and going on for a long time with a huge group of fans, let's pivot to Phantom. Because yes. I think this is going to be released right around the end of the Broadway run, but I want to hear a little bit from you about what that experience is like, and really the parallels between. I mean, there's such different shows with it, but they're both Andrew Lloyd Webber shows, and they have some similarities. What was that experience like, being able to pivot from Cats to Phantom, which again couldn't be more different in some capacities, and also fairly similar in some capacities?
Right. Doing Phantom of the Opera, it has been the honor of my career because, we mentioned the dancers sort of idolizing Cats VHS, and I was a singer who idolized the Phantom double cassette. I loved the show, and I would jokingly tell my friends, I didn't start out wanting to be an actor. I started out wanting to be a music teacher and went to New York to do, my master's degree, and was like, oh, I really like singing and acting and all this. And if I ever was to end up on Broadway, the only show I would ever be able to be in because of what I do is Phantom, and I was saying that in 2000, all my life. But once I moved to New York in 2008, jokingly, because who could ever even wish enough to join your favorite show on Broadway? But all that aside, when I finished the Cats tour in 2010, I stayed involved with Cats. I actually did a production in the round at North Shore Music Theater just after playing the same tracks, Gush Girl, Tiger, and Bustifer. And the common link between most all of Andrew's shows is a lovely woman named Kristen Blodgett, who I'm sure you've heard of through these interviews, because
of course
she literally changes lives every day of her life. And she's another person who's just so filled with love and joy, and just an absolute pleasure to work with. So she was auditioning me for a production, a national tour of Evita. And at the same time, I didn't know this, but there was an opening for a swing position in the Broadway company of Phantom. So I was in a callback. I don't know how many callbacks I had for Evita, too many. But I was in there, and she was like, could you sing your own song again? She put me on her phone. She recorded me. And what I didn't know is she sent that to the folks that made casting decisions for Phantom. And so when I got an offer, my agent was like, hey, you got it, or whatever he said. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go do Evita. I'm so excited. He's like, no, you got Phantom on Broadway. And I was like, what? I didn't audition for that. But I was in a basement restaurant in Times Square taking this phone call, and I'm sure people were looking at me like I was having a fit. I was so excited to even be considered to be a part of that show. So I started Phantom in 2014, And you're right, they couldn't be more dissimilar, except for the glory of the score of both, you know. Um, but yeah, I've been with Phantom since 2014, and
Wow.
I just finished a run like 2 Sundays ago before I had to jump up to Massachusetts for another show. But long answer shortened, it's an honor. It's an honor to be a part of this production.
I love you. I think we're getting a peek into how the Andrew Lloyd Webber universe works, because this is, as I've done this, what I've been calling the Phantom Cats interviews, I have noticed a theme here, which is most of you did not audition for Phantom, and you were auditioning for other Andrew Lloyd Webber things like Cats or Evita and everything else, and then ended up in Phantom. And so I'm wondering how much has happened in the reverse, where people are auditioning for Phantom on Broadway and then all of a sudden end up in Cats or in Evita or in, other ones of his shows. It seems like it's the same, it's the same group of people working and casting stuff. So it makes sense, but it's fascinating to hear that, because I had never really thought about that. Again, as someone who's not in the industry and has never been to an audition or, even thought about an audition, to hear so many of the I know you tried out for this, but you'd be perfect for this. And well, that's also us. So here you go. And we're going to pass you over.
Yeah, I think it happens. I think it happens more often than you might think. And I think I think the main thread in that is Kristen Blodgett, but also not all, but a lot of Andrew's shows. I've been able to do 5 of his shows in New York, and all 5 of my experiences I can solely rest on Kristen Blodgett's hands. But they generally use the same casting office and the really useful group, Andrew's production company, is obviously has a heavy hand in all of his work. So I think, why not? If you're singing the Evita score and you're doing a good job, what makes you think you're not right for a certain opening in this other show? So yeah, I do think it's a bit incestuous, and thank God it is, or I may never have worked ever.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's a good place to be in, because he's got so many shows and stuff on Broadway. He's got new stuff on Broadway coming out, so it is a good group to be in with.
Yes, and he is. I mean, I've met him a couple of times. Not to just jump stories on you, but when I was doing the sequel to Phantom of the Opera, we did the American premiere of Love Never Dies, and it was a tour. And I opened that show as the Phantom, and he was in we did sort of a tech run, really just for him, before we started previews. And, they say never meet your idols, because they'll always disappoint you. He was quite the opposite. He was the most, he's not, with me anyways, we have a multi-billion-dollar production on the line here, and so he's got a lot to think about. But Kristen made sure that I was introduced to him. I guess she thought that would calm my nerves a bit, which ultimately it did. But while he wasn't verbose, he was so kind and so generous and so supportive. He said, I know you can do this. I know this is the thing for you. I can't wait to hear you sing my music. And he really was a genuinely kind person. And with someone of such sort of star quality as he has, celebrity, I didn't expect that. I expected him to be rather cold and just like, get it right. He wasn't. He was so warm and so loving. And I would work for him and for Kristen for the rest of my life if they'll have me.
That's great to hear too, because you always, when you have somebody that famous, that big, there's always the worry of being a little out of touch and again, like you said, cold. And so it's so great to hear that it's not it's not lost on him. He's still very warm and accepting and a good person. He ignores all of my messages, so I'm still waiting for the day for him to respond to me and I can have that same experience. But no, I love hearing that, because all I get of him is the public version of that. Like I get the DJ Andrew Lloyd Webber, or the Bad Cinderella speaking Andrew Lloyd Webber. You get that version, and I actually really appreciated he did during the pandemic, like early on in the pandemic. He voiced over watching the 1998 movie, and it was kind of fascinating to watch and hear his commentary on how things went. But also seemed like, to your point, seemed very down to earth and very just kind of normal for such a creative genius to be that type of person. So it's always good to hear that when you hear that about someone as famous as him.
Yes, and it's so good to work for people like that too, as you know.
Yeah. So let's get to the rapid fire. I want to get to the last couple of Cats questions so we can get to the $1 million question. So if you could go on for one night, if you had, immediately could do it, male, female, sing or dance, doesn't matter, but just one track, if you could do it, who would you want to play in Cats for one night?
Bomb Ballerina.
Because
that person has to be a fantastic dancer, but also has to be able to sing for the gods. And, when you can find a real triple threat like that, that's who I want to be.
Yeah. It's such a fun answer because there's so many different ways to approach it. And Bomb is a very common answer for this just because it's such a dynamic performer. Well, I think it's because the way I've noticed is that people answer this question one of two ways. You either answer it of the here's where I really think I could do it and I could go really do it well, or here's somebody that I would never be me and I would love to just go do that for one night. So you get a lot of bombs and tuggers because especially if you're not known to be the super outgoing, bombastic type of person, it's fun to be I could go do that one night versus if you're the reverse is if you wanted to be Gus for one night, or if you wanted to be Old Deuteronomy for one night, or Grisabella to Belt one night, it's a little bit more of the inward looking version. So it seems that's been the trend I've noticed as I've asked that question.
Yes.
Who are your favorite and least favorite Cats in the musical? Not people, not actors, but character-wise.
Right. Oh, goodness gracious. My least favorite? Well, I guess if I was in the Gus mentality, any of the young kittens are very annoying because they just don't stop moving. So, if they don't honor the way theater used to be. But I guess my favorites would have to be Old Jute, as our leader. I have to respect and love him. And Jelly Loram.
These are very Gus answers. I love it. What is your favorite song from the show?
Well, oh goodness. They're all so different. It's like asking you to pick your favorite kid, isn't it?
A little bit.
I love how musically, and I never got to sing it on tour because I was changing clothes. But when I did Andrew's bio musical, it was a show called Unmasked, we highlighted Skimbleshanks. And I love how often the meter changes in Skimbleshanks. It makes it a real challenge to sing. The trite answer, I guess, would be Memory, but I don't think I could listen to that all day, every day, but I think I could bop out to Skimbleshanks.
Yeah, it's a great answer. I think what's fun about this question is I'm getting this in the moment today. My answer to this question has changed multiple times, depending on where how I'm feeling, where I am. When I left the show, it was Mungo Jerry and Ripple Teasers, all I could remember. And then it was I've had a moment where Skimbleshanks, when someone kind of explained to me more of the musical piece to it and the time and everything else. I think McCavity's song is super fun. It's the one that gets stuck in my head most. So there's a lot of ways to answer this.
That's the thing too about how brilliant the score is. I guarantee if you polled the audience after a show, at least one person would have every song stuck in their head. You know what I mean? Everybody would have a different answer because we all know Memory and we go in expecting it, but then you don't know McCavity or Mungo and Rum. Every song is sort of hummable and a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, I mean, I've asked this to everybody and I've gotten very different answers. There's been a few that have not been said, but for the most part, it's some people say The Ball, some people say The Naming of Cats and the Overture. It's not just even the cat songs. There's just a lot of really great music in the show.
And you mentioning the Overture, I mean, I need to play the Cats Overture before every show of any title I ever do because that is a hype song. If you're not feeling like doing your, Shakespeare play that night, play the Cats Overture and I guarantee you'll be ready to go. It's so good.
I love it. We're going to add this to Cats Overture and then, because I'm as someone who I'm about to actually go play a hockey game here soon, and it's as we get to that, it's I've never put that in my pump up mix, but I'm gonna add it now. It's gonna be mixed in with 8 Mile and all this hip hop stuff that kind of gets the blood flowing. But I'm gonna throw the Cats Overture into my headphones here before my game.
Follow it by Eye of the Tiger, and you won't be stopped.
Exactly. It's Eye of the Tiger. Yeah. It's basically like 80s rock, like for me, early 2000s hip hop, and now going to be the Cats Overture.
Great. Which is really 80s pop anyway.
It's true.
I think you've got a type.
It'll fit in my playlist well. It won't, Spotify won't be confused. Which cat? Here's my Phantom Cats question. Which cat do you think would haunt a theater the best? Like if they had that moment.
Oh, come on! It's got to be Gus.
Gus is a great answer for this. I think there's
You could You would never get Gus out of the theater. If you said, "Hey, do you want to haunt this opera house for the rest of your life?" He'd be like, "Yep, sign me up." I'm there. I
think this is where the Gus and Bustifer track together work because I think Bustifer is never leaving that box.
Hey, that's right. You can find Bustifer upstairs at the Masquerade buffet any day.
Yeah. So, okay, last and most important question. I have argued that I don't think Grisabella is the right Jellicle choice. I was hoping when we started that you were going to defend Gus for us, but it sounds like based on the way you played it, that Gus is not the Jellicle choice for you. So I want to know, do you want to defend Grisabella and why? And if not, who would be your Jellicle choice and why?
I wish I could please you and defend Gus, but my history with Gus is, as I said, more selfless, and I defend Grisabella. I defend Grisabella mainly because I know I'm not smarter than the people who wrote the show, including T.S. Eliot. So, who am I to deflect on what they wanted? But I also think, in the end, Cats is essentially about community and tribal nature of sticking together. And I think the Junkyard has done a disservice to Grizz by ousting her and shunning her and not letting her, retain sort of family within the tribe. And in the end, for a catharsis for the audience, we need a moment of reclamation. We need an awakening. And that is the reacceptance of Grizz. And since she's the only cat that we outright know 90% of the cats don't accept, in order to have a beautiful moment for the end of the show, I think she's the right choice. I think we need to reach out a hand and accept our fellow brethren and retain a sense of community. And I think that's what T.S. Eliot was going for. I think that's what Andrew honored, and I think it's the right choice. I
want to start by saying I love that you're like, I don't want to. I'm not going to try to rewrite a show that's been successful for 40-something years, which I agree. I look at this from the angle of the Jellicle world, and if I'm in the beauty of Cats is you've put me into this world. Like that's the whole point. I get to dive into this experience, and I get to see a little bit of this cult-like sacrifice and ritual for a year. So a lot of my interpretation and thought on this is, what happens last year? What happens next year? What happens not at the ball? Like I only get a glimpse of 2 hours of one evening with this family. And so a big part of where I struggle with Grisabella is, why is she not next year's choice? I love the community, bring her back. Why immediately sacrifice her? Why can't she spend a year with her family and get a time to reconnect? And yes, let's embrace her. Let's bring her back. And that is the message and the lesson. But let's let her have that time.
I mean, I applaud that insight. And I don't have an answer for you. Maybe we need a Cat sequel where, Grisabella somehow can come back and she's like, "Oh, you all made a mistake." No, it's a really interesting thought of, I've never thought of it. I've never put the word sacrifice on it, which sort of in my head has a different connotation, and it's sort of the ultimate gift. I thought, that they give her. It's that she can start anew. She doesn't have these afflictions and torn relationships. So you're saying, why can't we accept her, but not send her to the Heaviside Layer immediately?
Yeah,
why don't we accept her and keep her here?
Send her next year.
Yeah.
That's my current question and theory, and then that opens up a lot of questions of like who then gets picked, what's also the criteria for Old Deuteronomy, when's Old Deuteronomy's turn, when's Monk taking over. There's a lot of unanswered question here, and to your point earlier, the only thing that seems definitive is Demeter's backstory.
Yeah, poor Demeter. Yeah, when's it her turn? Oh no, I have a lot to do today, and now all I'm going to be doing is justifying this.
Yeah, there's a million ways to examine that answer, and the root of the question, if for me, like the way I think, if you really want to start thinking about it, is how does Old Deuteronomy make his choice every year? Is it the same criteria every year? Is it different every year? And then when you think about that angle, what is this year's criteria and choice, and what was last year's, and what's next year's, and what's the year after? And that is, to me, where you can start really debating who should go when and why, and who went, and then what does that mean?
That's a really good point. And maybe it's like stepping out of the world of actually being a cat and going back to like show world. Wouldn't it be cool to see a production of Cats that's written like Edwin Drood, where the audience gets to vote and they get to pick whichever cat they want, and the show has 27 different endings? So
your castmate Tug had the exact same comment.
No, he didn't.
And
that's so
I
funny.
love it because
God.
it is, and I told him, and I believe his will have aired before this, so this will be great. This is the original, the original joke I made that almost started this podcast. Was I saw Leona Lewis and I thought I saw the X Factor, and I thought that you could vote. And I've been joking for months now that you could do an audience vote, and when you're on tour, you could do an audience vote and have a different cat every night, and have like not take that cat out of the show, because that would be really hard to do. But they're not a choice tonight. So you could, if you do a week in Kentucky, you could have 7 or 8 different nights where it's a different choice every night, and that person was last night's choice, so you can't come. It almost sparked people to come see it more often, because you're going to get a slightly different ending.
I love it. I think Tug, who I adore, and you and me and Andrew should all get together and make this happen.
I mean, I've got a million ideas if we can make this happen for how to handle that. And I think you could write like slightly, not like dramatic difference in endings, because it's still going to have, like, you still have to sing Memory, but then she doesn't have to necessarily go. So then there could be like one more scene where you add in who's then picked and why based on audience vote. And then you still do it's the addressing of cats at the very end. So like you still have your ending. You don't have to change your true ending. So it's there. No, it's just a little technology.
It just changes. Yeah, it just changes who gets to ride the tire and fly away, which, let's be honest, every cat on that stage wants to do.
And I mean, we can quickly, everyone's got their phone. They're ringing half the time anyways. We could quickly spin up an app to vote.
Oh, if American Idol can do it, we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a couple thousand people in a stadium. Like it would be very easy to do it.
Right.
And I think it would thrive on tour.
I think so, and I think you make a very good point about people coming back to see who the choice will be the next night, which any producer will love that. So
yeah, you can.
I think we have something.
You could campaign. Like I do see this very X Factor American Idol-ish. Like we could, you could have signs for people. Like here's my vote today. Yes. Try to convince the audience, people around you, that like today's Gus's day. Gus should have went yesterday, and Gus didn't go.
Think of the merch you could sell too in support of your candidate.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been thinking about this for now almost 3 years, and so I'm just waiting for my opportunity to do it. My actual hope is I do have a friend who has their like I think 10-year-old kid about to potentially do a Cats production, and I'm like, maybe that's where I can test it. Let's test it like a a child, like a production where the parents are voting at the end, which is just going to be every parent voting for themselves, for their kids, but like. And we could get that's okay. I think we could get a trial run there.
I think that's a brilliant idea. That way you don't have, multi-millions of dollars on the line if it doesn't quite work out. But, I think it's worth
like
a shot.
Dinner theater. Like there's plenty of those, like, I mean, again, Kentucky, Indiana, we have these little dinner theaters where it's mostly local performers and they're always phenomenal. It's always fun to go see them. But like that's a good place we could test it. Like they're not going to have that high of expectations for
true.
Of what the production value of it, because it's a smaller stage and it's a big, at least the one I went to, it's always a big buffet in the front. Half the people are coming to eat.
Yes.
like we could take some liberties. I do need blessings from the Andrew Weber's group and everyone else, but but I think there's legs there, and one day he's going to respond to my DM, and I'm going to convince him that this is the future of theater.
Oh my god! Well, I need to make sure that his team. I mean, his team has got to know about this podcast. I mean, it's so incredible. I got some friends that work with him that I'm going to push this on.
Please do.
We'll see if we can't get a response to your DM eventually.
Yeah, please do. I've done some stuff like we did a fundraiser for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS with the third tour, the 87 cast, and they definitely got his approval for some stuff we use. So there's there's been some connection, but I've also kind of jokingly, I this is parody. I am mesmerized by the work he's done and poke fun at it as a purely a humorous way, but I do think I've got some ideas that I can consult here on. Here are some backstories we could do. Here's some angles you could play. Here's some thoughts you could do. Like I've got a lot of knowledge now, 100 episodes in, of talking to various different cast members. I'd say
you're the most prepared person for this job on the planet.
Except for that, I cannot sing, I can't dance, I have zero theater background. My knowledge is purely the writing and backstories and of this, and that is the extent of it. But it's what makes it fun.
If there's one truth in theater, it's never too late. So I'm sure whatever you're lacking, you can learn in time to not.
I also think this is where I just I need good people around me. I just need the right experts in the industry to do this, because I don't know a lot about everything else in theater, which is okay. That's not. I grew up going to sporting events and playing hockey, and not the reverse. Like, I didn't know about the 1998 movie until 2016. So you learn a lot of stuff at points in your life, and that's where I'm at today.
Good for you. I mean, and here we are talking about cats for an hour.
Exactly. Well, this has been super fun. How can people stay in touch with you? Website, social media? What's the best way to keep up with you?
Social media is great. I'm at Bronson Biz, B-I-Z.
Awesome. I'll link everything here. Bronson, thank you for coming on. This has been so fun and a blast to have you on to talk about Cats and Phantom.
Thank you. I'm going to put on the Cats Overture right now.
Get pumped up for the day.
Yes.
I love it. Well, thank you, and thanks everyone else for listening to this episode of The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. To follow along, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere else to listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at The Wrong Cat Died, or check out our website, thewrongcatdied.com.